So I'm going to invite both of our wonderful speakers to take a seat, and I'm just going to do a little introduction and then turn it over to them because they are the experts and it's really their show, and I can't wait to hear both of you in conversation with each other. But I'm very excited. I think this is going to be really, really special, and I'm so happy so many of you are here, both in person and online. So I just want to introduce both Dr. Sara Glass and Chani Getter. So Dr. Sara Glass is both a PhD doctor and also a licensed social worker, is that correct? She's a psychotherapist, author, and speaker dedicated to empowering members of the queer community and individuals who have survived trauma to live bold, honest, and proud lives. She serves as the clinical director of Soul Wellness NYC, a private psychotherapy practice in Midtown, and as a clinical supervisor to Jewish Queer Youth, a nonprofit organization supporting LGBTQ youth. Her memoir, do you have a copy with you or no? Okay, somebody hold up their copy. Somebody does, okay. Her memoir, Kissing Girls on Shabbat. Yes, everybody in the room can see. It's a beautiful cover. It's got sort of a blue motif and a great pair of lips on the cover. And I heard the soft cover is gonna look like that, but in like orange and pink, right? Okay, so you can also be on the lookout for the soft cover. Her memoir, Kissing Girls on Shabbat, covers themes related to mental health and the interaction between queer identity and religiosity. So really blessed and honored to have you, Sara. Thank you so much for being here. And Chani is also a licensed social worker and also a published author, by the way. Chani Getter is Footsteps Scholar in Residence, as well as a psychotherapist, an award-winning queer activist, and an interfaith minister. At Footsteps, Chani provides training and mentoring to deepen the cultural competency of our organizational partners and referrals to improve the quality of service for Footsteps members. At the age of 23, Chani left an arranged marriage and as a single parent began a journey of self-discovery. Chani's life and work have been featured in 2 documentary films, One of Us and Devout, and in numerous news outlets including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, El, Haaretz, and the New Yorker. And Chani's first book, Mapito, Embrace Yourself, is available now, and we do have some copies out there as well. So really so happy to have both of you. Very excited to hear the 2 of you in conversation with each other. And at the end, we'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A as well. Okay.
Thank you. How's this? Is this working okay? Okay. Thank you. So nice to be here with all of you on Pride Shabbat. I know we wanted to maybe do a moment to breathe. Yeah.
So I'm going to invite us all to notice where we're sitting, notice our bodies, notice where we're coming from. Some of us are coming from service, which was incredible, right? And some of us are coming from, like, just kind of coming in from the street and had our day. And so my invitation is, if you feel comfortable, putting your feet on the ground, noticing your body, and taking a breath. And breathing out. Science teaches us that if we breathe out for longer than we breathe in, we actually relax our nervous system. And so I'm going to invite us to do that for a minute. Breathing in and out. And we're going to invite you to take this journey with us. We don't know where it's going to go, and we're really excited. I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story for those who have not yet read Kissing Girls on Shabbat. I'll just catch you up to speed, and then we'll take you through some parts that aren't in either of our books, through the process of what it's like to leave a high-control religious group. I was raised in Hasidic Brooklyn. How many of you are familiar with what that looks like? The men in the fur hats, the women in the wigs, the long skirts. Okay, so it's a pretty familiar crowd. This is a world that's just about 10 miles away from here, but completely sequestered from this world in Manhattan. I was listening to the rabbi talk earlier about like the rainbow and light and like being proud to be yourself. And I just still to this day am amazed that I'm in a temple. I'm hearing words about rainbows and seeing rainbows, and I'm allowed to be here wearing pants, you know, on a Friday night, holding a microphone. It just unbelievable to me that I've gotten here. A part of how I got here was through some help by Chani, so you'll hear about that. But I was raised to wear skirts and dresses from the age of 3, to participate in an all-girls school education. And I was, you know how like we talk about banned books and we're like, you know, some of these books are banned in America. The entire world was banned for me. I only had access to Jewish novels published by Jewish publishing companies, Holocaust memoirs, and like Hebrew Bible texts. I wasn't allowed to watch movies or TV. And so what happened in that environment is all I learned was what I was taught at home and in school, which was I would marry a man at the age of 17 or 18 or 19 if I was really old, you know, and go on to have many Jewish children. And I really wanted to do that. I wanted to do that because the consequences of not doing that were very clear. I was told like that if I did not follow the path, I would go to a fiery hell, a cauldron of like burning, you know, literal hellfire and brimstone, and that there would be punishments that happened within hell that included physical torture, etc., and so forth. And so I wasn't really inclined to like deviate from the path I was given, you know, because that sounded horrific. But as I became a teenager in that world, I started to realize that I would have one really major hurdle on my path, and that was that I couldn't seem to stop falling in love with girls. I wrote a New York Times Modern Love essay about my first love at 15, and I talked about how little language we had for what we were experiencing. I ended up at 19 years old, knowing I had an attraction to girls, but feeling that the only thing I could do was marry a man. Now think about yourself at 19 years old. How many of you were married at 19? I'm checking the Zooms. No, just a little dog walking across the screen. So we got no one, not one, okay. You might have been entering college or thinking about what you wanted to do with your life, maybe not knowing what you wanted to do with your life. At 19, I was married to a man I met 6 times, and I soon after had 2 children back to back. People often ask my daughter, how long were your parents married? And she goes, how long does it take to have 2 kids and run? So it was like a 4-year marriage, and just to, like, the Kissing Girls on Shabbat spans the 13 years between my arranged marriage at 19 and my eventual coming out of the closet at 32. But to give you a really broad strokes, when I decided to leave my husband, which was very unusual in that community, part of what happened was I signed a divorce agreement in which I pledged to raise my children as Orthodox Jews. And the consequences for that would be if I didn't raise them as Orthodox Jews, I would be ceding custody to their father. I didn't know a lot at 24 when I divorced my children's father, but I knew that I wasn't willing to lose my children, and I would do anything I needed to do to maintain custody of them, including acting religious. And that got tiring after about 13 years, and eventually I watched The Footsteps film One of Us, the documentary, and I saw this therapist in it that was like, I was like, this is a queer-looking person who understands where I came from and seems to like speak the exact language. I'm like, maybe they can help me. And so I walked into Chani's office at 32, and I was quite a mess. And this is where we can pick this up.
So Sarah walked into my office, and one of the things she said to me was, I'm really strong professionally. I'm like a bodybuilder in this arm of mine. And personally, I've been wearing a cast, and I have no idea how to use this arm, right? And that was such a powerful image that you brought into the office because it explained so much, right? So often we see people and we hear their professional achievements or something, and we put them on some sort of pedestal of like, oh, you know how to do life. But the thing about leaving an ultra-Orthodox religion, or actually any fundamentalist religion, is that the very tools that we're supposed to have as a really young age, we don't have. We just don't have words for it, we don't have language for it, and we absolutely have no idea how to do this thing, right? We don't know how to do life. I often talk about the fact that when you grow up Hasidic, you wake up and you wash your hands with water that you prepared the night before, right next to your bed. You recite Moda'ani, which the morning prayer, and then you get dressed and you put on your right foot first, and then your left foot, and your right and your left. And then you tie your shoe first your left, and then your right. There's a whole system. Not only do we not choose what we wear, we don't even choose in what order we put our clothing on. And so here's Sarah, 32 years old, coming out, and making choices is a skill that you learn from a very young age. And right, so like,
then I already at that point had a PhD in psychology.
yeah.
And so I walk into your office and I'm wearing like what I think is a very cool outfit. I have like American Eagle skinny jeans with rips at the knee and a short sleeve t-shirt. And I feel very cool. And you knew immediately that was not the entire story.
I think I said to you, do you have a skirt in the car? And you looked at me like, how do you know? Because we've all done that. We've all had skirts in the car and kind of pulled them up and took them off depending on where we were and how we were. Yeah.
And so at that point, I did still have a skirt in the car because even though on some level, I was starting to come out of the closet, I needed to go and get my children from their father, and I had to pick them up like from his, we were doing a custody switch. Like he had them parenting time switch. And so I had a skirt in the car and I was gonna take the jeans off, put the skirt on and then go get the children. And I thought that that's how I would live the rest of my entire life. Like you said, you know, the cognitive developmental structure of a child's brain is forced to grow in the direction that it has space to grow in. It's like a plant growing within a like wooden box. It can only grow as high as the box allows. And so for me, I grew up in this world where the consequences were so clear. It's kind of like, has anyone watched The Handmaid's Tale? So these little girls in the purple dresses that are being raised to be wives, I so relate to those little girls because they're told this is your future. You're going to marry someone we find for you to marry. And if you don't, we have men with rifles standing all around you. So like, it's not like you have a choice, right? How would you even dare to dream about another future when the consequences are so clear? And so it wasn't men with rifles for me, but it was like, well, fiery hell, losing your children, you know, that's extreme. And so I wasn't like daring to dream outside the box. But then when I came in, so what happened was I watched One of Us, and I knew that Chani worked at Footsteps, but I was still afraid to go to Footsteps. I was afraid that if I walked into the Footsteps office, I could get caught going there, and that itself would cause me to lose custody of my children. I wasn't yet, like, I was so far shackled within my own mind that I was afraid to access resources with which to break free. And I also felt like as a PhD, like I was like, I don't want to take resources away from other people who maybe need them more. And so I felt safer and like more comfortable and like I could be in control of the situation to look for Chani in their private practice. And at that point, you started telling me some things that made me challenge the thinking. And I needed to work with somebody who knew where the invisible shackles were and the invisible bars of my cage were, so you could help me like learn how to traverse those barriers.
Yeah. And I think this is a good place for us to talk about our coming out stories.
Oh, yeah.
So I grew up Hasidic, and I was married off at 18 and 1 month, and I was 19 when I had my son, and 20 when I had my daughter, and I was going through a little bit of a difficult time, and I had to be laying in bed during the time that I had my daughter. And so I'm lying in bed and whatever, and my ex had always wanted a TV. I didn't know this, but this was like his secret. He really wanted a TV. And he says, we should get a TV. So we got a secret TV, right? We got the secret TV in our bedroom with in the cabinet, whatever. It was a whole thing. So I'm lying in bed. After my second one is born, I eventually have another child. But after my second one is born, I'm lying in bed. And Ellen was coming out. This was literally the time Ellen was coming out. 1997 is when my daughter was born, right? I'm sorry. Whatever. Yeah, right? So I'm watching, and she comes on. So I don't know how to use a TV, and she's there, and there's a book there, and it says lesbian something. And everyone is laughing. They keep zooming into the book, and everyone's laughing. And I'm like, what is a lesbian, right? And so this is before Google exists. And so I go and I get my dictionary, and I look up lesbian, and it says, a person who's attracted to, I don't know, a bunch of words that I didn't know half of what the words mean. It took me 3 different lookups, right? What does this word mean? And we, you know how we did that, right? And what does this word mean? And okay, we're 3 words in, and I'm like, oh, I'm a lesbian, right? 3 words in. My ex comes home, Hasidic guy, young. We're both really young. We're in our we're literally 20 years old. And I say, I think I'm a lesbian. He's literally the first person I come out to, because I'm just learning this word. And he says, what is it? And I read him the thing, right? I read him the thing. And he says, can you one more? He needed only 2 words. I needed 3. But anyway, we get to the end of it, and he goes, of course you are. And we continue living together and having another child. I don't even leave him because I'm gay. Because the shackles that you talk about don't even allow us to think beyond that. I knew I was kissing girls from I was 12 years old. I knew what I was doing. I didn't know nobody else was doing that. I had absolutely no shame when I came out, because nobody had ever told me it was not okay.
Wow. But it's a shocking story, and it's one I hear in my office, things like that all the time, because I still work so closely with people from communities where they're even afraid to think about what I had a client come in recently and say, what is lesbian? Kind of didn't even know how to use it in a sentence. What is lesbian? And wanted me to provide the definition of that for her. And then didn't want to think about what would happen if she met that definition. Wow. So my coming out story, I was kind of not as clear, but in some ways similar, because I knew that there was something called a lesbian, I think, when I was younger. I knew that people did things like that in California. I didn't, not in Brooklyn. Probably not in New York, but I was I think in California. I don't know why it felt like California is where all the hedonistic, sinful behavior was occurring. But I was I think there's people like that out there, but I can't do that here. And I did have my first girl that I kind of connected with at the second girl, maybe at 19. She asked her rabbi. She called the rabbi and said, "What happens if I have a physical connection with another girl?" And he said, "Well, since you're only girls, it's not as bad of a sin. It's just disgusting." I feel like that could have been the name of my book. Just disgusting. And so I buried it, and she buried it, and then I continued to live like this heteronormative life until I just couldn't suppress it anymore. And then it took like so much time for me to finally come out to myself. So from my first relationship at 15 until I came out to myself, can you imagine the layers of, and I'm sure as queer people here, you know, even if you don't have as extreme of a story, I think it's such a familiar experience to say, this thing I feel in my body, is it true? Can I rely on that? It's so risky to rely on how I feel in my body. Let me just try not to feel that. Yeah. So I'm wondering if we can talk through maybe some of the like ways in which you helped me break out of the bars that were, you know.
Sure.
Well, I can say some things that you said to me. So Chani said some things, because Chani knew where, like as you heard the story, Chani knew exactly where these invisible shackles would be. And so kind of knew what to say to me. And this is like just such a fascinating relationship that we've had, where you've known exactly when and what to say. And so on that first day when I met you, you said, Sara, I think you know what you want. You know who you are. You're just afraid, and you don't think you deserve it. And I left that day and I was like shaken.
I think that so many of us, when we know our truth, lie to ourselves about it, right? It's like such a normal thing of like, oh, it's dangerous to do that, so I'm gonna say I don't know. And we use words like, I don't know, I'm confused, can you help me make a decision, right? And so much of the work that I wanna really, like Footsteps does and both of us do in our private practices, is about telling people, you know what you want. Like, if we just listened, can we listen together, right? And it's actually when people come from fundamental homes, and I think in general, society as a whole has done a great job at telling all of us, don't listen, right? Don't listen to what you know to be true for you because of X, Y, or Z. And so when I said that, and I don't remember saying it, but thank you, when I said that, the real thing is like inviting the person next to us, you know what you want, and allowing us to start trusting ourselves. I think that's one of the big things that, you know, we do as therapists and we do at Footsteps is like, can you trust you? And if when somebody walks out of my office after whatever amount of time we've worked together, if they can trust themselves, I've done my job, right? And that's the bigger question for all of us always. It's like, can we trust ourselves? Because here's the thing about the body. If you grow up in a fundamental community and you've been told your entire life that your body is an instrument of God, right? Whether it's in the very Christian communities where there's pious culture, right? And modesty culture, whether it's in the Hasidic community, which is a little different and a little the same, we have learned to not listen. And if we start listening, our body actually freaks out. Like people actually have real reactions to starting to listen to their body because they've spent their entire life telling their body and their mind, if I listen to you, I will be in danger. And the truth is, I would have been. If I had listened to myself when I was younger, I was this non-binary kid running around Muncie. Everybody was always telling me to like not be this, whatever this was, even though I wore a skirt all the time, because that's what I had to wear, but everybody could feel the energy I was walking around with. It was dangerous for me to be who I was. It really, really was. I wasn't making it up, right? And so it's the same thing, yeah.
And I think that the other thing that's really beautiful, since you had worked for Footsteps, you were aware of the real dangers that I faced too. Yeah. And so in addition to helping me overcome the cognitive barriers, there were real barriers with regard to custody of my children. So when I began to think about leaving the community, Chani taught me about this idea in New York State law called the status quo. And what happens is courts tend to rule in favor of keeping children in their status quo in case of a divorce. So if there's a child who's in a certain school and one parent leaves and moves and wants to take the child and switch their school, the court will rule in favor of status quo. And that's something that's misused by the Hasidic community all of the time in order to keep families religious and in order to keep children with the parent that stays religious. They'll say the status quo was that your child was in a religious school. So you, the parent who's now wearing jeans or not keeping Shabbat, you're damaging the status quo. And so what you help me do is very strategically, and I've never talked about this openly, but I am going to talk about this openly because so many people reach out to me every day, all the time, and they say, how did you do it? And it's not fair to present a narrative that it was an easy before and after. And this is the in-between. We had a year of strategic planning where I learned how to change my children's status quo. So I carefully took them on vacations where I said to my daughter, you know what, I will love you no matter what you wear. You don't have to wear a skirt. And my little daughter at age 11, I remember her looking at me with this shock in her eyes. And she said, really? You'll love me no matter what I wear? And then 2 seconds later, she said to me, can I get overalls? And so we went and got her first pair of overalls, and Chani instructed me on take a picture of her in her overalls, document a year of the children's status quo shifting, so that by the time I got to court, I would be able to say, well, my son hasn't always been wearing a kippah. And of course I gave my children choices about that. I never told them what to do, I just gave them the freedom to do whatever they wanted to do. And I said to them, okay, we're at the airport, right, for example, do you want to eat the kosher sandwiches or do you want to get some pizza? And so sometimes some of them wanted to first keep kosher, and sometimes they were ready to eat the pizza, and whatever it was, I was like, I'll buy you whatever you want. And in that way, we slowly shifted, and you also taught me how to help my children make their own choices. Because even the idea of them making choices was so scary for them. They were middle schoolers in a very Orthodox environment. So one day you said, there's this stew that we used to eat every Saturday afternoon called cholent. If anyone was raised Orthodox, it's like this brown mush that you leave on the crock pot overnight, and it has meat and potatoes and beans, depending on where you were raised. If you're raised in Hungary, you have more beans in there. If you're a Hasidic from Polish descent, it's more potato heavy. But you said, what if you offer the kids an opportunity to choose a different lunch? And so I said to them one week, do you want cholent or French onion soup this week? And they were like, what? You're allowed to do that? And they stared at me for a while, but then we had French onion soup one week. And so it wasn't overnight, and it was emotionally, cognitively, developmentally, and legally strategic.
Yeah. So I was able to tell this to Sara because I was in court for 18 years. I left when my youngest was 18 months old, and I saw the beautiful family court for all the years until they grew up. And I was also able to tell this to Sara because at Footsteps we had helped so many people do this. It's not easy, and the community has caught on a little bit and is trying to stop it if they can. And it took a lot of trial and error. I want to name that. So many people lose their children when they come out either as not religious or as LGBTQ in New York City, in one of the 5 boroughs. And that story needs to be told and needs to be heard and needs to understand, so that when someone comes in, similar to if someone is in an abusive relationship, you don't tell them to leave right away. They might be walking into a bigger danger. And so it's really important to slow people down and to find people who know how to work through this and have seen this and will believe them. A colleague of ours, Freddie Reese, who who runs the organization called Unchained at Last, and she's trying to stop child marriage in the United States. She often talks about that people come in, she had a therapist working for her, and the therapist says, I think the client is delusional. And Frady said, why do you say that? And the therapist said, because the client thinks she's being followed. And I said, the client is being followed.
Yeah.
Right? So especially nowadays with all of the tech that we have, so many of our members are being followed. And so one of the things that we do at Footsteps, when people come into the office, I usually say, can you leave your phone outside? So that we know that they're not being recorded and we know that they're safe, right? So thank you for like reminding me of that process that first year. But it is really important to understand the slow down and that it's not going to happen overnight, and that if we want people to come along with us, and especially if we have kids, we have to do this strategically. I am noticing the time, and you wanted to do questions, but
So
yeah.
yes, and this is, I think, just to point to like why we're here and why we do what we do is it took you 18 years, it took me 13 years. We hope that for the next people we speak with and that Footsteps works with, we can shorten that span and we can have people like know that there is access to a full team of support, that they don't have to do this on their own. So that's why anytime Footsteps is like, we want to do a talk with you, I'm like, where is it? You know, let's go. Because we want like this message to get out, and we need, and like I don't even work for Footsteps. I don't get paid to say this, but like they are the most hardworking nonprofit I have ever seen. I've been to their offices and they just stay late and they take calls. Like Naomi, who works for the housing program, told me someone called her in the middle of the night from the airport and said, in his thick Hasidic accent, where should I go? And Naomi answers the call and tells the person where to go when they're trying to leave. So they could use all the support and resources that they can get, and I'm sure Michelle will talk more about that soon. And I also, just before we go to questions, I wanted to ask, you wrote your book, I think, for the same reason like that I'm talking about here, is to save other people, like the years of angst. But I wanted to ask you, like, in your own words, tell me about writing Mapito and what you hope people will get from it.
So Mapito is really a collection of my own story and woven in with client stories throughout, and it invites the reader to go deep. I think some people don't have access to therapy, and for many, they need to do it first to kind of figure out how to navigate. If I can make one person love themselves and have compassion to themselves and the mistakes that they made when they were younger, even a tiny bit, I think that's why I wrote it.
I just want to say thank you both so much. I mean, I could listen to you, both of you talk forever, and I'm sure most people in this room could as well. I think you're doing actually pretty good on time, so I think we'll transition to Q&A, but I just want to say thank you so much, both of you, for sharing such a moving and powerful story, and one that I think touches on really relational points for many in this room, and I'm so happy that you are here and that you're sharing this story. So thank you for allowing us the opportunity to hear it. And yes. So I'm going to pass it to Michelle, who you heard from at Services, who's going to run the Q&A. But Michelle, I'm happy to help in whatever way. And I think we'll do, maybe like 10 minutes of questions. Great.
And I won't take any of your time for asking questions. So if folks have questions for Chani or for Sarah, more about Footsteps work, just raise your hand. I could bring you the mic, and we might take a couple at once so that we can make.
Also look at the online.
We'll get Zoom questions as well. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I actually read your book not knowing what it was. I read it because I love the title.
That was the goal.
And then I couldn't put it down. But my question is, I have a two-part question. What is your relationship like now with your family, okay? And what is your relationship like now with your children who are, no longer babies? So I just wanted to know, what that process has been like for you since you sort of, left, and, how your family felt about it.
Yes, that's a great question. So I no longer have a relationship with most of my family, and I understand them. For them to have a family member like me is extremely threatening. It would put their reputations in the community at risk, and I know because I was one of them. And so I don't push it. It's sort of a respectful distance. I do have a very close relationship with my children. We are FaceTiming and text. They're at college now. They made it through. They got to college. I'm so proud of them, and we're very close.
So my family of origin didn't speak to me for the first 7 years that I left. They didn't even know I was gay. It was really about me. I was still very religious in the beginning. I started driving a car and assigned female at birth. Don't do that in my community. So it just that's what it was. It gave me the freedom to become myself. It really did. I was young, my kids were young, and it really allowed me to grow into myself. We then reconnected for a period of, I want to say 14 years about, and now I'm again out. But I do have a relationship with 2 of my siblings. So that's really nice. And one of them is very religious, and she and her husband and her kids come and stay at a house for Shabbos. So it's a whole situation of how we create Shabbat for them, but they are very there. So, I'm 25 years out. I think it morphs and it shifts, and it's continuing to do so. My kids are grown. My youngest is 26, and I don't know. I'm so proud of who they've become. None of them had children before the age of 24, which was this awesome thing. I was they were I'm 24, no kids. Each one of them did that. It was this moment of you left at 23 with 3 kids, and I'm okay. And so it's a beautiful thing.
And I want to actually pick up on 2 things that both of you said. One is that in order to be a Footsteps member, you have to be 18 and older. But we actually have a very robust segment of what we fondly call the second gen, which is the kids of members who come through us. And Chani told me a story one time. I don't know if you know this, but Chani was facilitating. I think it was the first gathering of the second gen group. And you said, raise your hand if your parents are divorced. And this is such a big stigma in the community, right? And these kids just slowly start raising their hands, and then all of a sudden look around and they're like, you too? And there was, Chani facilitates that group. And we have an LGBT support group that we run, and a parent support group for people who really need that type of community and the consciousness raising that it takes to find other people like you. And one other thing I wanted to say about education too, because I know that's such an important part of Sarah's journey, is we give out $500,000 a year in scholarships so that our members can pursue education, because we know education is such a cornerstone stepping to make it in secular society. And so I've heard,
Yes, I could not have gotten out without having a PhD first, and that's part of why it took me 13 years. I had to sneak out to get my MSW and then get an online PhD. And with that, I was able to afford the team of attorneys it took to leave. And so, when people have access to education, that can help them access all the freedom.
Yeah. I saw another question over here. Yeah.
Thank you. I also grew up religious, and my question is, part of what I miss most is ritual and tradition and the melodies and all of that comes with that familiarity. And so my question was, what, if any, relationship do you still have to tradition, whatever that may look like for you? I also got I got a whole PhD in religion to kind of grapple with it. And so would just love to hear your thoughts on kind of some of those pieces.
So when I left, I had actually signed, the stack of papers about, mine was about keeping my kids ultra-Orthodox. The wording was, I think yours too, right? Yes. So, and it had lists of things that I needed to do with my kids. And this is before gay marriage was legal, so just for all of us to kind of put context in. And friends of mine were getting married. One had grown up ultra-Orthodox and one had grown up Catholic. They're like, hey, Chani, can you officiate our wedding, right? The weddings that were not really weddings, but were weddings, right? All of those things we did back then. And I said, sure. And I officiated the wedding and I said, this is what I need to do. I want to stand in a place where God is bigger than one religion. I need to stand in a place where each of us hold access to it, if that makes any sense. And so I pursued an interfaith ministry degree. And when I was ordained, I originally thought that eventually I'll become a rabbi, but I wanted to walk into rabbinical school as someone who held whatever God, goddess is, bigger than the one thing we were going to explain it to be. And for me, ritual is extremely important. I do weddings, baby blessings, funerals, the whole thing. And it's really about seeing the person who's standing in front of me and say, how can we co-create ritual together? I also believe that singing, the way we do here in synagogue, we did earlier, but definitely in ultra-Orthodox spaces, but here too, singing co-regulates us. Ritual co-regulates us. And so I often invite clients, I do ritual in my office sometimes, and sometimes online. I'm like, ritual co-regulates. What do you need for your body to come along and your mind to come along? It's very messy for me. I identify as someone who is Jewish, and I walk into every single place of worship. I've worshipped with the Sufis and the Hindus, I've gone up once. I didn't know you're not supposed to take communion, so I went up and I got one. I found out later I wasn't supposed to, but that's a whole other story, right? So like, I walk in the world as in, I have a friend who calls me a ritual junkie, and I think that I do that is something that I do. I do find that every person navigates it differently, and it's constantly changing. So I want to just say, it's so incredible that you went out and you got a PhD in religion to make sense of it. And it's a beautiful kind of journey of like what you'll do to make sense of your own journey around it.
Something I want to chime into is, at Footsteps, our tagline is your life, your journey, your choice. And so some of our members choose to come back to and have a relationship with Judaism on their own terms, and others don't. And we just gave out we gave out about $10,000 of micro grants for people to have Passover Seders. But it was, because Passover Seder hosting is kind of expensive. And so it was like, in order to be able, And so the testimonials that our members wrote back of what they were able to do with the, $100 or so that we gave them was just so moving. It was like, I got other OTD off the Derech folks together, and we made a Seder on our own terms. So it's really, up to each individual person. Do you have anything you want to add? And then we'll get to one.
I think that summed it up beautifully.
Oh, sure. We could take our last question from Zoom. I don't know how. Is there a chat?
Doug Herpin has a question, and he can unmute now. Go ahead, Doug.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is to Sarah. When you were taking your children and normalizing non-Orthodox behavior, they were still enrolled in that school. So, and they would go to that school, you do that at what, then, I'm doing vacation, you tell them eat pizza at the airport or whatever, and then they go or they even maybe ate pork or whatever it is, and then they went back to the school afterwards. How did you keep them quiet from not to make a problem with the other children and with the staff. And I guess the other part of the question is legal. Does the fact that you agreed in writing to raise them Orthodox have any legal weight in court? So.
So I think it's part of like, how did I have the children stay? I was doing all these things, but they had to go back to an Orthodox school, and how did I keep them quiet? Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's more in the book, Kissing Girls on Shabbat, but as a psychotherapist, I was very concerned about this, because that's one of the big things I teach children is like, and teach parents, you should never tell a child to keep a secret. That's where abuse happens. And, I treat traumatized children, and I was already doing that at that point. And so I talked to my children about, they knew, they were like, we don't want to tell our friends, we don't want to get kicked out of school. We want to have friends. But we did spend a lot of time painting that year. I did like ad hoc art therapy at the kitchen table on Saturday nights, where we just painted our feelings, and they painted their visions of what they wanted their future to be, and we spent a lot of time talking. And I also brought them into second gen. I brought them in to talk to Chani. I had them meet safe people with whom they could talk about what was going on.
Yeah, okay. Okay, last actual question, and then we're gonna wrap it up. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
You're talking about the body and denying what your body feels. And my question to both of you is actually, I know what it feels like to be hunted. I know what that feels like in my body. When I was in the army, I was hiding. And there comes a point where you say, okay, this is who I am, and I am going to embrace who I am no matter what, that I am choosing me. Can you talk about that moment for both of you? I would like to hear that. And knowing full well that you were thinking about your children too, and how were you going to do that? It must have been very overwhelming in terms of what's going on in your brain and in your body.
I'll take it first. Okay. So for me, I was 23, and it was not safe for my children to be in the home that we were in. And so for me, it was really about survival. I knew, I walked into a therapist's office when I was 22, right after I had my third child. And the therapist looked at me and she said, Chani, because I was on this rant. I was like, you don't understand. I didn't have a choice to get married. I didn't have a choice to have kids. I'm on and on and on. And she paused me and she said, Chani, every day that you stay with him, you are making a decision not to leave. I couldn't do that. When she said that, that was the moment that I could not make a decision to stay. The way she had phrased it wasn't, the way she phrased it was like, every day that you stay, you are making a decision not to leave. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't raise my children in that home. And I was lucky because I present as white, I was dressed like a Hasidic woman, and I called the cops. And to this day, all of my children, with all of the crazy that what police officers do, they know that those two people who showed up kept us safe. And so that was my moment. And I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I had to get us out.
I think for me, for some people, I think there's a moment, right? And then for some people, there's a series of small knowings that happen over time that add up to the moment where you do make a choice. I tried not to have a drastic choice be made. I'm like I have a reckless side, right? But I'm a very sort of gentle, measured person, and I never wanted to come out. I never wanted anyone to know. I mean, look at now I'm like very outspoken. But at that time, so little things that happened were, I sort of saw the light in my daughter's eyes start to go dark as she was being raised as a preteen in that culture. She had a spark and curiosity when she was younger. And then she would go to school and learn things like boy babies were more important than having girl babies. And like she would be invited over to her teacher's house and be told that she needed to wear a longer skirt because the teacher's husband would be home. And what if her little 11-year-old calves would tempt the teacher's husband? And her light started to dim. And I saw my son get resentful at the materials he was learning in like memoir class that were very intense and the things he was being told. And over time, I just knew I stayed to maintain custody of my children, but what good would that do if I maintained custody of them and then kept them in the same shackles that I was already in? And that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to keep them with me. I needed them to live free. And so I started this very slow journey, but I wasn't even completely done with the journey until somebody outed me. And then I was forced out of the community I was in, and that's in the New York Times Modern Love podcasts section. There's one I did with that team, and that talks about the story of being forced out.
I'm here. I think that there's such a spectrum of members' experiences. There's sometimes not one moment, but many, many moments. And I'm going to end us on a note of joy, celebrating Pride. We have a party every year for our members, and it was in January. It was a winter party. I don't know if you remember January. It feels like a long time ago, but it was pretty bleak. It was right after inauguration, and there was a lot of really painful things happening in the world. We had 200 Footsteps members come to the House of Yes, which I don't know if you know, but is a venue in Brooklyn, and they partied. And this was some of our members. They'd never been to a club before. It was their first time coming out. We rented out the whole space just for us. And a big part of what Chani does and what we do is cultural competency training. So we met with the venue ahead of time and we said, here's who's about to come in the door. Here's everything that you need to understand about what our members might be experiencing. We told the bartender, they've never ordered a cocktail before. You need to be really patient. And like, let's actually print a menu that gin can go with tonic and things like that. And so I remember seeing some of our members dressed fully up in just fabulous outfits. And I said earlier, about 30 to 40% of our members identify as LGBTQ plus or questioning on their journeys. And you just saw such queer joy in that room, and really just grateful to be in this space and celebrating the intersection of all of our complex and messy identities. And there's a few things, if you're like, I feel compelled to learn more about this work or support this work, we have 600 volunteers who help make this work possible. And like Sara was talking about in her journey, we really rely on pro bono referrals for things like attorneys and growing our network of people that we can refer clients out to. So if that is a particular need that we have right now is pro bono attorneys. As you can imagine with the current administration attacking pro bono firms, it's been really tricky, but we need that. So any connections you have to pro bono firms would be super helpful. We also use volunteers for tutoring, helping people get their GEDs, helping to edit their college essays, helping to make their resumes. So if you're interested in learning more about how to volunteer with Footsteps, please come and find me. And also, I'd be remiss as our co-director of development, if you're feeling moved and want to support our work, we'd be so grateful. There's some envelopes right outside, and every gift counts. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Chani. Buy their books. Yeah.
Wow. I just want to say, oh my gosh, I'm verklempt. I'm so moved. And thank you, both of you and Michelle. Thank you for helping to, it's because of Michelle that Michelle brought us together. And Rebecca's here, yay! So both Michelle and Rebecca really did the work of helping to partner our two communities together, which I think is a really wonderful marriage. And yeah, I'm so happy to have started this connection, and I hope it will continue. And yeah, buy Sara's book, and Chani's book, which is outside also, and go kiss some girls on Shabbat. Yeah. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Thank you.